meine Arbeit für richtig hältst, ob du glaubst, dass ich fleißig gewesen bin, dass ich gearbeitet habe, dass ich mich in diesen Jahren für dich eingesetzt habe.
Have you ever wondered what it would be like to work for the most feared man in history? He was right next to him as the world fell apart, not as a fighter or guard, but as his secretary Traudl Junge was 18 when she took the job that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Everyone was shocked when she finally told them years later, "Don't blink, because this story will keep you interested all the way to the end." How Hitler's secretary was chosen. An office sign stuck to a wall in Munich asked people to work as typists for the government. This was the start of something bigger. Traudl Junge, who is 22 years old, was one of the young women who saw it. She worked quickly, was nice, and wanted her parents to be proud of her. When she clicked on that ad, she had no idea that it would lead her to one of the darkest rooms in history. It was easy to win. She only thought about the beat of the letters and the soft sound of the machine as she sped across the keys. She had no idea that someone was looking at her or that the words of Adolf Hitler would soon be written in her neat lines of text. After a few days, she was told she was picked for something important. It was just an offer to work for the boss of the German Reich, with no further information or background. She thought there would be troops and shouting when she got to the mountain retreat in Bavaria. Instead, she found a hallway that was quiet, rugs, and the smell of coffee. Hitler didn't look at all like the angry tyrant she had seen on TV. He was calm, polite, and even charming when they were alone. She told him about her family and asked if they were healthy. He also asked if she liked chocolate cake. Instead of being harsh like a tyrant, he spoke with the love of an uncle. That's when her guard dropped. She thought, he's not really a monster. He smiled, thanked her for coming, and told her she would be fine. It was only a moment, but it changed her life forever. After that, Traudl Junge sat very close to the most feared person in the world. From her office, she could see the courtyard of the Reich Chancellery. She typed notes for herself, speeches, and emails. Every day, she saw him in the morning and at night, often when no one else could be near him. Still, she didn't see any violence or blood papers, teacups, and quiet hours of focus were all that she knew. The person she saw plan, not kill, was a leader. Evil hid in plain sight like that, inside the everyday. She didn't think much of the work. She would get rough papers with lots of pencil marks, clean them up, and hand them back. She typed orders that she didn't question, calls to banquets she never went to, and propaganda she didn't write. She smiled at the soldiers she saw in the hallways, but never asked where they were going or why. She told herself that she didn't need to know. This was the first scary truth she would later tell. Bad things don't usually scream. It whispers through everyday jobs and friendly faces a lot of the time. Hitler kept his close friends and family small, and Traudl was the quiet watcher in that group. People only heard about the man she saw. He was crazy about the little things, like what he ate, when he worked out, and even his dogs. He didn't like loud noises and cared most about being faithful. The only sound in the room while he worked was her typing. He spoke slowly and in long lines, and she didn't say anything. Instead, she let her fingers translate his voice into words that would soon be heard across the country. She told herself at first that she was just doing her job. She didn't set off alarms or plan attacks. She pressed keys, that's all. But with every paper, signature, and signed order that was sealed, she helped build the tools of destruction. It wasn't that she saw everything that made her story so scary. It was that she didn't want to. She would sometimes hear bits of talks about operations in the East, or special transports in the evenings while the others drank or fought. At that time, they didn't mean anything to her. The sounds of laughter and music drowned out the words. She didn't understand what those words really meant until the following years. But she didn't see evil in 1942. Her eyes saw speed, not slaughter, but perfection was what she saw in that man. She worked hard and did a great job. Hitler called her the best secretary he'd ever had. Every praise drew her closer to him. She didn't know that each keystroke connected her more to a monster who hid cruelty as order and slaughter as government. The war looked like it was ending in chaos to everyone else, but in his office, life had a strange routine. Meals at set times, dogs playing at his feet, staff laughing politely, and writing speeches for a country that was on fire all the time. The mask was the normalcy itself. She would later say that the second scary thing was how normal everything felt. For her, the commonality of evil wasn't just an idea. It was something she did every day. Always, the papers were clean, the spelling was right, and the desks were neat. Still, every page she typed felt like a life was ending far away. For many years afterward, she said that was the thing that scared her the most. The ease, the peace. The false idea that being close to power was attractive. In the end, she said that what she refused to see was her biggest sin, not what she did. She thought that being ignorant would protect her for a long time. Because she didn't know much, she was helpful. She spoke for a dictator who no longer trusted his generals, but still did trust his secretary. Her hands were quick and accurate. She wrote down his thoughts, remembered them, and kept a record of them. In those early months, the bunker wasn't quite the grave it would become. There was still light, coffee breaks, and talk of winning. She had no idea that one day she would be the last person to hear what he had to say. Still, signs of failure started to show up even then. The news from the front got worse. The visitors came in with red eyes and dirty clothes. Hitler got angrier in his talks and shook his hands more often. He still smiled at her when he turned around. He thanked you anyway. That contrast, angry at other people and nice to her, was what confused her the most. It was how being bad kept her safe. She stayed because she thought being loyal was a good thing to do. She stayed because facing uncertainty would have been hard. She stayed because he wasn't like the man everyone saw on signs. When she finally spoke out after many years, she said what she saw him become was scarier than anything she had seen him do. She learned too late that monsters don't always roar because of the difference between her public anger and her private kindness. They whisper nicely sometimes, even when the world outside the window is on fire. Once upon a time, the young secretary thought she had the best job in Germany. She was about to learn what it really meant to serve power. Berlin is on fire above her. Down below, the air gets thick. She is also told to bring her typewriter when the world dies. Typing the end of the Reich. Berlin wasn't a city anymore. It was a cloud of smoke and dust. There was a lot of damage above ground. Below it, in the Führer bunker's tight maze, time seemed to be stuck. The walls were wet, and the air smelled like fear and fuel. Generators hummed, lights flickered, and typewriters clicked like time was running out for something that had to happen. Traudl Junge was there, in a small room buried in the ground. Her typewriter was sitting on a rough stand. It had been 25 years since she met Hitler, but she still felt young enough to think she was safe with him. Still, even safety started to sound weird. Booms rolled over her head like thunder every hour. The lights were shaking. The dust from the ceiling fell like gray snow. The man everyone called the Führer shrank right in front of her eyes. The tall, strong person from the newsreels was no longer there. A pale, shaky old man took his place. His left hand was shaking so badly that he could barely hold a pen. His steps were slow. His voice was rough, and he could lose his temper at any time. 1 minute, he muttered angry words about being lied to, and the next, he spoke quietly, as if he were making plans for a fresh start. She never knew what kind of him would show up at the door. She typed what he told her to do every day. Talks that no one would ever hear. Divisions that no longer existed were given orders, names, meetings, and last-minute job openings that were in lists that no longer meant anything. The walls around her echoed with fake confidence. Some officers sat in corners, stared blankly at the floor, and whispered about cyanide while others argued in the halls. Still, the same things happened every day. Reports in the morning, food in the afternoon, and sadness at night. Hitler wouldn't leave Berlin. He refused to leave the South, even though his generals begged him to do so. He said the city must not fall. He said that secret weapons or coming together with new people would change things. But there was no army outside the bunker to save him. It looked like the Soviets were about to attack. Every rumble from the streets above destroyed one more block. Inside, paranoia took the place of planning. He said that friends had betrayed him, cursed officers for what he thought were their mistakes, and fired anyone who suggested giving up. Traudl said it was like seeing a kingdom close down from inside a concrete coffin. Even so, she kept typing. She didn't believe him anymore, because she didn't know what else to do. Her fingers moved on their own, turning a mess of letters into neat lines. It seemed like everyone around her believed her. Bormann sat at his desk, quiet and focused. He signed papers with the cool accuracy of a banker, not a man whose war was ending. He looked like he was putting together something new while everything else was falling apart. Couriers came and went with sealed bags that said art, archives, or medical equipment. It wasn't a question. People who did that didn't last long. It was strange how things seemed more organized. The worse things got, documents were filed, signatures were collected, and money was sent. Plans were still being made in code while the cave cracked and the city burned. Junge found out later that these weren't the papers of a government that was about to fall, but of something that was getting ready to survive the fire. The cave turned into a theater. It felt like every move was practiced. Loyalty was shown in a ritualistic way, with clothes pressed, salutes crisp, and faces expressionless. It was all caused by being tired, drinking, and giving out cyanide pills like candy. It felt like even the meals were staged. The only sounds that broke the quiet at the table were the clanking of spoons and the roar of bombs nearby. Hitler's mood changed as quickly as the bombs went off outside. Then he sat quietly with his dogs and stroked them like a parent, calming his child, while he was mad at an imaginary enemy. Some people said he still thought he could win. Some people said he was already making plans for how to end his own life. Junge saw despair and defiance mixed together in his eyes like poison in a glass. She was asked to type something new one night, his last political will. The words came out slowly and in a tired, flat voice. He put the blame on his generals, his friends, and his foes. He told Germany that he believed in them and told them to destroy his body when he died. Junge didn't flinch or stop. She moved her fingers faster because she knew she was writing down the last words of a kingdom. After she was done, she carefully stacked the pages, let the ink dry, and gave them to him. She had no idea that the paper she had just typed would later be used to support the story that Hitler had died in his cave. But something didn't feel right as she put the typewriter away. It was too quiet for a place that was about to fall apart. Too many orders for a man who is about to die. Bormann's messengers were still moving through the tunnels outside the room, carrying papers that didn't belong to the past, but to a future that no one was meant to see. Because the truth was already being written somewhere else. When Traudl Junge pressed her last key, she thought she was ending the last chapter of the Third Reich. She wouldn't say anything again for decades. And what she didn't hear in those last days would be scarier than what she saw, the things she did not hear. People were expecting shocking scenes from inside Hitler's group when Traudl Junge finally spoke on camera many years after the war. They wanted to see screamed orders, violent conversations, and clear proof of mass murder. It almost sounded like the opposite of what she said, which is what makes it so scary. She said that gas tanks were never brought up by anyone. There are no names of people who need to be killed. There were no direct orders to kill everyone. There was no open talk about death camps in the rooms where she worked. From her desk, the worst crimes in history didn't sound scary. It sounds like plans, speeches, and official letters. Nazi hunters and historians heard, and they didn't just hear innocence. The sound they heard was scary. She worked with the man who was in charge of everything. Sometimes they were in the same hallway. She typed what he said. She saw his next-door staff. The fact that she doesn't know brings up a tough question. Was she really unaware, or did she choose not to look too closely? The answer she gave was short and cold. She said she worked hard at her job. She typed quickly, fixed her mistakes, did what she was told, and didn't ask any questions. She didn't think much of the papers that came across her desk. They were full of names, times, places, and coded language. She thought that someone would be honest if something really bad was happening. It wasn't done, so she ignored her doubt. That's when her story gets really scary. The bad things around her didn't have to yell. Silence was important. People like her doing normal things without wanting to know what was going on was important to it. To be a part of the system, she didn't have to do anything. She only had to type away and keep her head down. Martin Bormann, who was in the same group as her, was planning something much bigger than she knew while she worked. He quietly and quickly signed papers, gave his approval for moves, and moved things around. Most people thought he was a dull figure. In fact, he was helping the Reich move its power into money, businesses, and foreign accounts, so that it would not have to lose again. Traudl didn't see the whole picture, but a lot of the papers she had to deal with were linked to it. Names of companies, cash permissions, and connections to other countries, all neatly written down, stamped, and kept. They were just files to her. Some of those trends were later linked to money and power networks that lasted after the war. And this is the most important part of her story. She shows us that you don't have to be just a secretary, just a clerk, or just an employee to protect people. That's not because you're mean, but because you only want to look at your work. The method that worked around Hitler didn't just work on crazy people. People who didn't want to know too much were needed. Her words take away the comforting thought that bad things are always easy to spot. It's clear from what she says that the worst crimes can be hidden by nice bosses, neat offices, and good manners. Hitler was still a monster, even though he was nice to her. She was more likely to think her work was safe after that. Later, she admitted that this was the worst thing she had done. She never asked what her work was for. It wasn't that she followed orders or planned crimes. She learned the hard way that I didn't know wasn't an acceptable reason. That was proof of how well she had been taught not to ask. That realization affects a lot more than just her, every bank that moved gold that had been stolen, every company that uses kids as slaves, each and every official who didn't see the whole picture. They all did the same thing, which was to feed something very big. All of them can look at Traudl Junge's statement as a mirror if they think that keeping quiet will make them innocent. This is what she really said. And it's scary. Evil doesn't just need leaders. Anyone can help it work as long as they feel safe, busy, useful, and loyal. Others later came forward with a different story, one that said the Reich she helped type for did not just die in the fire. She only remembered how quiet it was in the bunker. The confession that changes the story. Traudl Junge thought she was recording the end of a nightmare while she sat underground and typed Hitler's last words. But something much bigger and quieter was going on around her. She believed she was writing the last page of history. The truth is that other people were already writing the next chapter, which would make her quiet even scarier. Many years after the war, when Europe's towns had been rebuilt and Berlin's ruins were old history, a weak old man showed up in South America. He lived with a fake name in a quiet German neighborhood in Argentina that was tucked away in the lakes and mountains. When he finally spoke, people all over the world heard his story. He said that in the last days of the war, he had been an SS supply officer. The next thing he said, though, set off one of the biggest and most controversial secrets in modern times. It seemed like an impossible claim, but he talked about it with the calm accuracy of someone remembering a shipment, not a miracle. His story started in the same bunker where Traudl Junge had written down Hitler's last words. But where she remembered feeling scared and worn out, he remembered having a plan and a duty. He said that there had been no confusion at all. A plan was made. It was a secret escape plan signed by Martin Bormann himself, and he called it Operation Second Sunrise. He told them it wasn't just about art or money. Moving what was left of the Reich's money, papers, and a special traveler was its main goal. He talked about trucks that were full of sealed boxes that said medical supplies. He later found out that the items inside weren't medicine at all, but gold bars, fake money, and IDs. The boxes were moved through the same tunnels under Berlin that Traudl's runners used to bring papers to people. They were then driven to secret airstrips on the edge of the city. Following that, the story split into two different tracks. The first was Operation Serpent, which sent officials and assets north to Denmark and Spain on transport planes. The rest would be moved across the Atlantic by submarine as part of Operation Seawolf. Each name, code, and route had been written down and then thrown away. After each delivery, the couriers changed their names. The man said that Bormann was behind it all. This was the same Bormann whose papers Traudl had filled out without question before. What the officer also said was that Hitler's death in the bunker was a fake. He talked about the use of body doubles, which were men who had surgery to look like Hitler and Eva Braun. These men were then shot and burned so the Soviets could find them. Under that scary theater, the real couple used the code word "Eagle Ready to Fly" to get away through the tunnels. He said that at night, a small group of people got to Tempelhof Airfield. It was running, and a Junkers plane was waiting on the runway. A man in a gray coat got on. The officer gave a bow. In response, the man put up a shaking hand. After that, the plane was no longer seen. From that point on, the trail became less clear, with coded messages, missing cargo documents, and money that couldn't be found. The officer said the plane got to Denmark and then Spain, where U-boats were waiting in secret bays. He named two subs, U-530 and U-977, that were said to take people across the Atlantic. After several months, both ships turned in their papers off the coast of Argentina. Their logs were missing, and their men wouldn't say what they had done. After many years, the U.S. released declassified OSS and FBI reports that had strange similarities with his story. These included strange ship arrivals, crates labeled diplomatic materials, and the sudden appearance of German farms in Patagonia. People who work as fishermen said they saw landings at midnight, trucks moving uphill under tarps, and German engineers who showed up overnight in the mountains. One house kept coming up in those stories. Inalco House, a mansion on the shores of Lake Nahuel Huapi that is far away from everything else. It was built by a German architect and fit what the officer said about a safe place, set up for a high-ranking criminal on the run. The man also talked about a group called Das Spinnennetz, or the Spider Net. This was a group of ex-officers, bankers, and businessmen who worked together after the war to move Nazi money through neutral countries. At least that part has been shown to be true. Researchers have found dozens of accounts, companies, and front businesses that were all connected to Bormann's huge financial empire. These could be found all the way from Switzerland to Buenos Aires. But when the officer went even further and said Hitler lived quietly in Argentina until 1962, there was never any strong proof. There are no pictures, documents, or reliable witnesses to what he said, which mixed fact and myth. Still, a lot of what he talked about was true, like the money, the subs, and the networks. That's what's so scary about this discovery. Traudl Junge thought she was writing down the end of the Reich, but others were making sure it would go on. When she typed, sealed, and filed the same papers for her boss, they were linked to the system that made powerful men disappear and money flow into new lives. Because she didn't say anything and expected to just do her job, she became a part of a system that wouldn't die. Even though Hitler never made it to those faraway lands, his impact did. It wasn't armies that carried it, but books, contracts, and silence. People are still arguing about the old officer's story, which is stuck between proof and conspiracy. The scariest truth it shows, though, is that evil doesn't always burn out in the open. It sometimes changes its form in a quiet way, using money, power, and people who think they are just doing their job. Traudl Junge's typewriter went silent below Berlin, but that secret kingdom she never saw was already starting to breathe again. What her words really reveal. Traudl Junge's voice was calm when she finally spoke on camera in Blind Spot, Hitler's secretary. It was almost too calm for what she was saying. She didn't say anything about gunshots or blood. She talked about forms, being nice, and saying no. It wasn't the shouting in the streets that scared her. It was the silence inside the building. She said she hadn't asked the questions that could have saved her life because she was young and stupid. A moral crime I didn't recognize until it was too late, she said, of living next to Hitler and acting like she didn't see him. That's what makes her story so scary. She realizes that. It busts the idea that it's easy to spot evil. Hitler seemed cool, soft-spoken, and even kind to her. He thanked her for her work and asked how she was doing. He wasn't the monster she saw in the ads to her. He was a boss who told people they were good and expected them to be loyal. That's what scares people the most. The thought that someone who could kill millions could seem normal, even nice, in private. It was interesting to see how her life showed how obedience can turn into participation. She never fired a gun or gave an order, but every keystroke she made kept the machine going. The regime around her thrived on people who didn't question or fight, and who thought their small part was safe. According to Junge's evidence, the system relied on more than just cruelty. It also relied on comfort. The real thing that kept the Third Reich going wasn't hate. It was habit. The habit didn't end in the bunker either. Men like Bormann were able to carry out Operation Kontinuität, which moved Nazi money into hidden accounts, thanks to the same kind of quiet, unquestioning efficiency that filled her office. It ran the rat lines that took officers across seas. It paid for the factories and houses that were built in South America. While Europe was getting back on its feet, Junge's computer was part of the same rhythm. People going about their business and telling themselves it wasn't personal. And that's where this story leaves its chilling echo. If you were hooked till the end, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And click the next video now popping up on your screen.